Where do the Scottish people actually come from? It sounds like a simple question, almost too simple. A small country on the northern edge of Europe, a population of just over 5 million people, a culture that feels deeply rooted in history. Kilts, clans, ancient castles, a language that seems to echo from another time. But beneath that identity lies one of the most complex genetic stories in Europe. Because Scotland is not just one story, it is many stories layered on top of each other over thousands of years. Stories of survival, stories of invasion, stories of disappearance and replacement. For centuries, historians tried to answer this question using fragments, ancient texts, place names, legends passed down through generations. Were the Scots simply Celts, descendants of Iron Age tribes who painted their bodies and fought the Romans? Or were they something older, something more fragmented? And then came DNA. In just the last decade, genetic research has done something extraordinary. It didn't just refine the story of Scotland, it completely rewrote it. Because what scientists discovered is that Scotland may be one of the most genetically unique regions in all of Europe. Not because it is isolated, but because it is layered. Layered with migrations, layered with replacements, layered with populations that didn't just mix, but sometimes almost completely replaced each other. And yet, somehow, traces of all of them still survive. In this video, we're going to trace that story, from the very first humans who stepped into a frozen, inhabitable land after the Ice Age, to the mysterious ancient peoples who left no written language behind, to the massive Bronze Age transformation that reshaped the DNA of the entire British Isles, to the Vikings, who didn't just raid Scotland, but became part of it, and finally, to the modern genetic map that reveals something astonishing, that even today, over 1,000 years later, the DNA of Scotland still remembers ancient kingdoms that no longer exist. This is not just a story about Scotland. It's a story about how human identity is built, layer by layer, migration by migration, generation by generation. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why Scottish genetic origin isn't just unique, it's one of the most fascinating genetic puzzles on Earth. To understand why Scottish genetics are so unique, you have to start with geography, because Scotland is not one uniform land, it's a landscape of extremes. To the south, rolling lowlands, fertile, connected, open to movement. To the north, rugged highlands, mountainous, isolated, difficult to cross. And beyond that, hundreds of islands scattered across cold, unpredictable seas. The Hebrides to the west, Orkney and Shetland to the far north, each one like its own world. And for most of human history, that geography mattered more than anything else. Because geography controls movement, and movement controls genetics. In many parts of Europe, populations mixed constantly, borders shifted, empires expanded, people moved, traded, intermarried. But Scotland was different. Its mountains slowed migration, its islands isolated communities, its weather discouraged movement. And over centuries, that created something rare: genetic pockets. Entire communities that stayed relatively isolated for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. Even today, scientists can detect this. Modern genetic studies show that Scotland has more regional genetic variation than almost anywhere else in the United Kingdom. In other words, people living just a few hundred kilometers apart can be genetically distinct in measurable ways. That's unusual, and it tells us something important. Scotland didn't just receive waves of migration, it preserved them. Instead of blending everything into one uniform population, it kept pieces of the past alive, locked into geography, protected by isolation. And that's the first reason why Scottish genetic origin is so unique, not because of a single origin, but because of how many different origins survived.
But to really understand this story, we have to go all the way back, before Scotland existed, before the Celts, before even the first villages, back to a time when Scotland was completely uninhabitable. Around 20,000 years ago, during the last ice age, Scotland was buried under massive glaciers. No forests, no animals, no humans, just ice, kilometers thick in some places. For thousands of years, nothing lived there. But then, the climate began to change. Slowly, the ice started to retreat. And as it did, life followed. Animals moved north, plants spread across the land, and eventually, humans arrived. These were Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, small groups of people moving across Europe, following food, adapting to new environments. They reached Scotland around 12,000 years ago, and what they found was a harsh, empty landscape. Cold, wild, unpredictable. They didn't build cities, they didn't farm. They survived, hunting animals, fishing along the coasts, moving with the seasons. And genetically, they were very different from modern Scots. These early inhabitants carried ancient European hunter-gatherer DNA, a genetic profile that had existed in Europe long before farming, long before civilization. But here's what makes them important. Even though later populations would arrive, even though Scotland's population would be replaced more than once, some of their DNA never disappeared completely. Tiny fragments of it still exist in modern Scottish populations today. And possibly one of the most iconic Scottish traits may trace back to them: red hair. The genetic mutation linked to red hair in the MCR1 gene is very old, and while it became more common later,
They didn't just come to raid, they came to stay. Nowhere is this more visible than in northern Scotland. Places like Orkney and Shetland became deeply connected to the Norse world. For centuries, they were effectively part of Scandinavian kingdoms, and this wasn't just cultural, it was genetic. Modern DNA studies show that people in Orkney and Shetland have some of the highest levels of Norwegian ancestry outside of Scandinavia itself. That's extraordinary. It means the Viking presence wasn't temporary, it left a permanent genetic imprint. And you can still see it today, not just in DNA, but in language. Place names ending in Vik, Ness, Dal, Bister all carry the fingerprint of Norse settlement. Even more fascinating, the Viking story doesn't stop in Scotland. Because when Norse settlers moved on to places like Iceland, they didn't go alone. Genetic evidence shows that many of the women who went with them came from Scotland and Ireland, which means Scottish DNA didn't just stay in Scotland, it spread across the North Atlantic, becoming part of entirely new populations. And this is another reason why Scottish genetics are so unique, because they didn't just absorb influences, they exported them. They became part of other genetic stories, other nations, other histories. But even after all these migrations, all these changes, there was still something remarkable happening beneath the surface, something that scientists would only discover much later. In 2019, a major scientific breakthrough changed how we understand Scotland forever. Researchers created the first comprehensive genetic map of the country, and what they found was astonishing. Scotland isn't just genetically diverse, it's divided into distinct clusters, clear genetic regions that still exist today. The Borders, the Highlands, the Northeast, the Hebrides, Orkney, Shetland, each one genetically distinguishable. But here's the most incredible part. These clusters don't just reflect geography, they reflect history, ancient history. In some cases, they align almost perfectly with medieval kingdoms that disappeared over 1,000 years ago. Kingdoms like Strathclyde, Gododin, Pictland, gone from maps, gone from politics, but still alive in DNA. Which means even though borders changed, even though cultures evolved, even though time moved on, the genetic structure remained.
quietly preserved for centuries. And this is truly what makes Scotland unique, because it's not just about where people came from, it's about how those origins stayed visible, locked into place, across generations, across time. So where do the Scottish people actually come from? Not from one place, not from one moment in time, but from layers. Layers of ancient hunter-gatherers who first stepped onto a frozen land, farmers who built monuments older than history itself, Bronze Age migrants who reshaped the entire genetic foundation, Pictish tribes who were never truly lost, and Vikings who didn't just arrive, but became part of the story. All of it still there, still visible, still alive in DNA. And that is what makes Scottish genetic origins so unique. Not its purity, but its complexity. If you enjoyed this video, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves history. And I'll see you in the next one.
There's strong evidence that its roots go all the way back to these early hunter-gatherers along Europe's Atlantic Fringe, which means when you see red hair in Scotland today, you might be looking at a genetic echo from people who lived there over 10,000 years ago. But their story doesn't end there, because the next group to arrive would change everything. Around 4000 BC, something dramatic happened. A new group of people arrived in Scotland. They weren't hunters, they were farmers. They brought animals, they brought crops, they brought an entirely different way of life, and more importantly, they brought a completely different genetic profile. These Neolithic farmers came originally from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and had spread across Europe over thousands of years. By the time they reached Britain, they were already transforming the continent. And when they entered Scotland, they didn't just mix with the hunter-gatherers, they largely replaced them. This was one of the first major population turnovers in Scottish history. Genetically, it was massive. The DNA of the original hunter-gatherers became a minority. The farmers became dominant. And with them came something else: monuments. Huge, mysterious stone structures. Places like Skara Brae in Orkney, the Ring of Brodgar, the Callanish stones on the Isle of Lewis. Massive constructions that still stand today, older than Stonehenge, older than the Egyptian pyramids, built by people whose genetic legacy is now only a faint trace in modern Scots. And that's what makes this moment so important, because it shows a pattern that will repeat again and again in Scotland's history. Populations don't just mix, sometimes they are replaced, almost entirely. And just when it seemed like Scotland had found stability, another wave was coming, one that would define the genetic identity of Scotland more than any other. Just when it seemed like Scotland had found stability, everything changed again. Around 2400 BC, a new group of people arrived in Britain. They are known today as the Bell Beaker people. And unlike the farmers before them, their impact was even more dramatic. Because this wasn't just migration, this was transformation on a massive scale. Genetic studies show that across much of Britain, up to 90% of the existing population was replaced within a few hundred years. Let that sink in. An almost complete genetic turnover. And Scotland was no exception. These Bell Beaker migrants came from continental Europe, but their deeper ancestry traced back even further, to the vast grasslands north of the Black Sea, the Pontic Steppe. And with them, they brought something that would shape Scotland forever: a new genetic foundation. Most modern Scottish men today carry a Y chromosome lineage known as R1b L21. That lineage arrived with these Bronze Age migrants, which means a huge part of Scottish ancestry today can be traced directly back to this one migration wave. But it wasn't just genetics. They brought language, early forms of Indo-European speech that would eventually evolve into Celtic languages. They brought technology, metalworking, new tools, new social structures, and they brought physical traits: lighter skin, different eye colors,
features that would become associated with Northern Europeans. In many ways, the people who arrived during the Bronze Age looked more like modern Scots than the people who lived there before them. And that's why this moment matters more than any other. Because if you had to choose a single point in history where the foundation of Scottish genetics was truly formed, this is it. But even this wasn't the final layer, because after the Bronze Age, new identities began to emerge, new cultures, new names, and one of them would become one of the greatest mysteries in European history. For centuries, there was one question that refused to go away. Who were the Picts? The Picts were an ancient people who dominated much of northern and eastern Scotland between around 300 and 900 AD. To the Romans, they were fierce, painted warriors, a people who resisted conquest, a people who seemed almost mythical. The Romans even gave them their name, Picti, meaning the painted ones. But beyond that, little was known. They left no written records of their own, no clear language, no definitive origin story, just symbols carved into stones, strange markings that no one could fully understand. And because of that, theories exploded. Some believed the Picts came from Central Asia. Others thought they were from southeastern Europe. Some argued they were a completely separate pre-Celtic population, a lost people, unrelated to anyone else in Britain. For over 1,000 years, the mystery remained unsolved. Historians debated, linguists argued, and no one could agree. Until DNA stepped in. Because in recent years, scientists finally sequenced ancient genomes from Pictish remains, and what they found was surprising. The Picts were not exotic, they were not outsiders, they were local. Genetically, they were almost identical to the Iron Age populations already living in Britain, which means the Picts were descendants of the same Bronze Age people who had arrived thousands of years earlier. They weren't a mystery population from far away, they were part of the same continuous story. And suddenly, one of Europe's greatest historical mysteries was solved. But that discovery revealed something even more interesting. Because while the Picts were local, Scotland itself was still changing, still evolving, still receiving new influences. And one of the most powerful of those influences came from the sea. Starting in the late 7th century, a new force appeared on the horizon, the Vikings. Seafarers from Scandinavia, warriors, traders, explorers, and unlike many invaders,